All right, we're looking at the 1920s today, and a lot of the changes that took place after World War One. So with the 1920s, one of the things, of course, that you have right off the bat is the post-war prosperity. And the reason for the post-war prosperity is because we had lent money. With World War One, we had given goods. We essentially were a lender nation to the other countries, and this meant, lender nation, that we were receiving a lot of money. We made money off of the war, and this will happen in World War One and World War Two, and then after that, wars kind of become a not profitable component. But you have these lender nations that take place, and one of the best examples of this probably has to do with Germany. And how it went about is, of course, under the Versailles Treaty, Germany was held accountable for all the cost of the war, which was just impossible to be able to successfully do anyway. But what we did is that we gave money to Germany. Okay, and then they make it go like this. Gave the money to the European countries, and the European countries gave money to the US, right? Which then gave money to Germany, and so it created this cycle of profit coming in, because of course it was with interest plus other monies that they owed us, and this works until the Great Depression. When we have the Great Depression come in, it's going to create a whole set of problems, not just for us, but for Germany and Europe as well, which of course one of the things was the severe economic depression of Germany is definitely going to lead to the rise of Hitler and World War II. So that certainly all played a big role in that. But so with this, the key with being a lender nation is the prosperity and increased wealth. And what was really just better conditions for at least the white population. Certainly wasn't necessarily the case in all areas for inner city and minorities. And we'll see with like the flapper traditions and everything else that way, that's going to be largely a middle class white women movement. But there was overall some benefits. One other thing that's interesting is the change with corporations, and not necessarily change, but an increase in that corporations. You had by 1929, over 200 of the largest corporations owned about half of the corporate wealth. And what this means is that it was small numbers of, and even smaller numbers for other things, of goods coming from individual corporations. And it's really how it is today. Go up here. So by 1929, 200 largest corporations owned about half of nation's corporate wealth. The consequences of this expansion was really more of a national consumer. And what it means with national consumer were that the goods and products were, you could expect goods and products to be the same throughout the US. Now, not everything, and it's still not today. Okay, so that, you know, there's still local markets. Don't want to make it seem like there aren't. But you have large corporations buying up other corporations and conglomerates that essentially have all these different products that they're making, and they get put out throughout America. And so you end up having Americans that, because of this, you know, buy the same brands and expect to see that anywhere they go, whether that's with, you know, food, appliances, clothing, etc. All of these things now were part of that, and that was very much part of this new system with the 1920s of corporations, and they said that that's something that we still expect today. While you have some local ones, if I were anywhere in the U.S., I'd expect to be able to find certain brands of deodorant, or that the refrigerator I buy here is going to be a similar one, you know, on the East Coast. So those brands are large brands that we think of, and some of the brands that we know of, like GE, General Electric, they really took and became the powerhouse that they were during this period. Okay, for the next part then is looking at the auto age. Right, this is also the period of the car and the expansion of the automobile being available, and what that does for that. During the 1920s, the U.S. they made about 85% of world passenger cars. So the U.S. was the major car manufacturer of the time. 85% total made here. And of course, the main one was with Henry Ford, the Ford, who certainly did several things to make sure that came about. One was, of course, the factory line work, and being able to produce a lot, and piecework was honed at this point. It was already there, but he certainly brought it to a new level of success of being able to put it out and available for everyone. The other thing that he did that was really important was, of course, the $5 wage. Okay, and this was a big thing back then because it was roughly double the going rate for most industrial work and labor at the time. So this was seen as a good wage. And what the idea is that his workers could buy one of his cars, which the main line was $300 for a Ford car. And the reason this wasn't altruistic by any means, the idea, of course, was that if his workers could afford to buy one, that's one more car sold in the process. But what it did is it helped, the factory line helped prices go down, and then you have the wages with Ford, which encouraged others in the future to do higher prices, is that you had a good chunk of the population. What this allowed is that a large portion of the population had cars, but especially by the end of the 1920s. Here's the thing for the mass production and sale of the Model T, which was the $300 one right here, the Model T, is that it has significantly changed the life and the economics behind what was going on, what was available. So if you look at what does the car provide, changes and we'll say, I don't know, opportunities with a car. Okay. You look at, let's do bullet point here because there's several things. One of them was building roads, which provides jobs, and also the suburbs wouldn't have happened without cars because of transportation and needing to get out there. You have gas stations, billboards, hotels, repair shops, what else would you be able to do? It also opened up the the economy for metal, paint, and rubber because of purchasing either for repair or the car. Dates, movement, and specifically living further away from home. It also, with job availability, I'll put travel. So these are just some of the things. Like there's more than this in the sense of that too. These are just some of the things. So you have road building, the suburbs, which are starting here. They're going to kick off more in the 1950s more than anything else. But they are starting here, are going to happen because of that. We'll look at the suburbs in a minute. Gas stations, billboards, motels, all these things were new economic opportunities, as well as, we'll see with the flapper, the ability to go on dates. This was a new thing. Staying in motels was a new thing. Travel, going on vacation further away. Again, the rich could afford to do this, but the average person didn't in the past. Now you have the average person being able to afford travel and going on vacation because of the car and what it provides. So it really changes the entire dynamic of life and structure, with leisure, with travel, with family, with how we look at life in general. With the auto was an important technology and development, and of course during the 1920s they really got to experience this change, and it rapidly changed how people lived, and some of that we see, like I said, will be embodied with the flappers and what they're doing. But one of the other parts that this changes, let's see, C, is of course cities and suburbs. With cities and suburbs, you have the portion of the population lived in urban centers. More people lived in urban centers than rural areas in the 1920s. And so you actually had a string of increase of cities in population because of jobs, personal freedoms, cultural richness, and all of these things. And it attracted millions of Americans from small towns and farms, as well as immigrants as well. Let me put just the idea behind it. So, increase in cities and population. They're drawn to it by the fact of the provided business opportunities. And again, this is in the the 1920s. Good jobs, cultural richness, and personal freedom. Right, more people were living in the cities than rural areas. Okay, an example of this would be Houston, which started off in 1910, it had about 75,000 people. And I mean, it was a railroad town, and served the Texas Gulf, but with the need and demand for gas and other petroleum products, by the 1920s, you had an increase to a population of around 300,000 people. And again, a big part of why this changed was because of the cars. And it provided cheap housing as it began to grow. And this allowed people, because of the car, they could expand outward, right? It still all goes back to this. Expansion was possible. Expansion outward, right? Rather than vertically in a city was possible because of cars. So this underdeveloped land that was, and so you had cities grow. But the other part is that then this growth led to suburb growth. Because as the cities began to expand and increase, and the fact that they could, not only because of public transportation, but also because of having additional areas available that weren't before because of the car. Likewise, suburbs became available and practical and possible because of the car as well. You had these good areas that were kind of out of reach before, that were now possible because of cars. And people look to move there because of the same type of thing of, you have the city and then suburban communities on the outskirts of the cities. That developed and increased significantly and became valuable real estate in the process. Because you often had here cheap prices. For some, it was an escape from the city. And again, this was possible because of transportation, which was cars. Again, the suburbs, this is just the start. The suburbs are really going to take off as a massive, massive thing, as an ideal in the 1950s. But it is all part of what's changing with that. Okay, the next thing is, we look at mass culture. Put that as 2. There's this whole shift in mass culture because of new technology and development that emerges during the 1920s. Movies, radio, journalism, recording industry, all of these things that are a huge part of mass culture that we still owe today in many ways too. So with that, let's look at movies first. In the earlier part of movies, when they started out, you had people that were, it was the 2 parts. They were called Nickelodeons or silent films. And these overlapped, but were also sometimes different. Okay, so by the 1914s, you had about 18,000 movie houses showing these movies. And this is where you get all of the major developers that start with this. So, actually, come back, we'll get to that in a minute. Nickelodeons, it was because it was 5 cents. Oops, to get in, right? A nickel. And they could range from anywhere from 15 minutes to an hour. And as was mentioned, they were silent films. The Jazz Singer, we'll look at in 1927, is going to be the first with sound. So it was, you had, the most popular ones were Westerns and slapstick comedy. Okay. Because these you could show action scenes of fighting or comic, think of like, I was thinking of the Three Stooges, doesn't need dialogue to be funny. You get the idea. They would also have signs that would be held up that would make, move this play on, like, now moving on to, or whatever that way. So those were available. They were very popular. Like I said, you had a lot of movie houses showing them. This is where you also get the major corporations that we still have today, which would be what? Paramount, Fox, Warner Brothers, and Universal. I mean, so these are still all present today, which shows you the major companies, movie companies, how powerful and profitable this was. And then they dominated the business. There were other smaller ones, but these were the ones that dominated the movie business and were able to make the more expensive features expensive and longer. Now, when the Nickelodeons and silent films were made, we could I'll just put it under here, 3. How it worked is the director was the famous person or known. There wasn't really even the famous yet or known individual rather than individual movie stars. Right, because it was about the director and what they put forth and whatnot. However, when you have the first talking film, so 1927, you have the jazz singer. This is the first talking film. This is going to create a fundamental shift to create movie stars from the actors. Right, the actors are kind of like the directors are today. With the silent films, and it shifted to a focus on the actors as this system, which creates, of course, this star system in the process that people began to attach to, that essentially there was, a fantasy and attachment to movie stars. And people wanted to copy and emulate their film idols. And there's a whole thing that gets played off on this. So because people, they wanted to know, copy, and experience movie stars' life. Right, and for many ways this was an escape from theirs. And this will actually be the same during the Great Depression. It still was an important escape. But what this creates then were magazines and the different goods that supported this ideal. So that could be haircuts, right? What the haircuts of the stars, clothing, goods. What you are going to get is eventually leads to product, what they call advertising by the stars, by famous people. This is also going to create, besides magazines, and that is, of course, tabloids and paparazzi. And the tabloids is the whole idea. The tabloids did come off of what we looked at with the Gilded Age of the muckraking. Was the predecessor. But tabloids was not about change. It was just about scandal and information on your stars. Scandal and info on stars. The other thing that comes out of this is with the with movies is in the famous and the star power that this created. I mean, this is all people they had. You know, they talked about the importance of that. That girls would go and cut their hair based on what famous movie star they had, and or that they tried to curtsy like certain ones. And this, of course, this will lead to change. I'll talk about the next thing in a minute, but I'll do 5. This focus on movie stars. Go on. Erase. There you go. The movie stars did lead to concern about morality and general basically traditional values is what they would say. Because at the time there was not a rating system, and so in some cases it was, you know, more risque than what we see now, and it did impact young people, right? And what they saw for not only clothing and haircuts and what would be, though, actions and behavior, what the sexual scenes. And this is going to certainly fall in line with the car and dating. In fact, the argument with the car was, of course, that there was increase in pregnancy, unwed pregnancy, because of the dates in the car as an area to have sex in. And this is going to lead to censorship. In fact, the censor board, that the rating system that we have now is from this. So there is a conservative backlash, we'll call it, to movies and stars. And it's also going to be to the flappers too, but we'll look at that in a minute. So you have all of this kind of new change in technology that's emerging, and at the same time there's going to be some pushback for it in the process. So the movies are a big thing. One of the other things that changes, B here, is sports. Sports were popular, but you have the rise of the professional sports star. And that the sports star, in a sense, they become a celebrity themselves. Right? Probably the well-known one of this time would be Babe Ruth. They start actually looking for players in high school. And this is also when it increases pay, increases, and you have advertising for it. Right, so all that's changing in the process. One of the other things that we're going to see, and we can actually look at that one next, is advertisement and how that changes and all of this process. You had the other things that you had some change with were radio. I mean, we looked at the new journalism, which was more of the tabloid component from it. Radio, which also you ended up using advertising for the major corporations so advertising ended up taking its part both in print and radio. Okay, so C, we'll do advertising. The advertising certainly took its lessons from, it learned from World War I and the CPI. Okay, and what they learned from that in the past, here, we'll do this past. Right, you have, it was designed, ads were designed to tell you what they have and describe it. So there was lots of words and few pictures. You know, and initially that was because of technology. New advertising. Right, but the new advertising was completely different in how they did it. What they learned from the CPI here was that you used a lot of color and pictures, and it was about desire over need. So that's the psychology of advertising. There's also going to be several components as far as how they, I guess, who they're in. So women are going to be featured in it a lot. And besides women, it's going to be, they're going to show them doing fun activities. Life is fun is the kind of idea. It was about consumerism. You had makeup, which was a big thing because makeup in the past was for prostitutes. Yeah, so at least advertising it and stuff. And so now they're advertising it to women and it's acceptable. They showed women smoking. There was more sexuality. Well, all of these things had been taboo in the past with advertising, and now we're all much a significant aspect of it. They actually did studies on human behavior and sex drive so that the advertiser, again, we're focusing on desires of the consumer rather than just a quality of the product. You had your part of the job was psychology in this sense from that. It was, ad agencies invested huge amount of time and money. So new advertising, let's do here D. The advertising companies. This used to be an unimportant job, what's called a minor job, and low pay. And what ends up creating before 1920. What happens is this becomes a massive department, and in fact you're going to get ad agencies or advertising agencies that didn't exist before, and they would spend large amounts of money and time to create the ads. And again, as I mentioned, they had this whole psychological and behavioral analysis on selling stuff, which was, again, to focus on creating this desire that they said equal to need, even though it didn't, right? I want, therefore I need. It was a whole new way of advertising in the process for that. Okay, I wanted to show you, I paused it for a second so I could get this up. That PowerPoint here so we can look at some of the ads that were on there. All right, so you have here. So I'm going to kind of go through and just mention. I was going to say, it should let me write on it. So one of the big things was here. This one is Perfume, right? Makeup and perfume. All right. Doesn't want to write well though. Here, makeup. Wow. Okay. Apparently that's weird. I'll just circle. Anyway, so you have makeup and perfume were new things. The fact that it was advertising to women, or I'll just write large, was also a new thing. And part of this was recognizing that women were the cultural consumers. And they did this in the Gilded Age to a degree. So that wasn't as new of recognizing women as the ones that were doing the consumption. But it was this display of showing this woman, and it's more elegant, it's more sexy, if you will. And this isn't even that scandalous with that. Was a new thing with ads. Notice the colors. Right, you've got lots and lots of color going on. There's almost no words whatsoever, right? You've got a few here and here. That's it. The rest is a large image. Okay, so there's one. Here's another one. National Oats makes kids husky. Again, few words, right? The rest is this kid having fun. Life is fun. This is a huge one in the 1920s. We have money. Things are going well. Go do things that are fun. Oh, look how fun he's having. I want to have National Oats for my kids. It makes them husky. I feel like that is definitely a cultural thing for the 1920s. You say this now, people are like, well, I'm not going to buy that for my kid or for me. I don't want to be husky. I don't want my kids to be husky. But that back then, that would have been fine. Yeah, look, they're going to be strong. It was more like the advertising for makes your kids strong and bone support and things like that. That's what they meant by husky. But the key is he's having fun. Lots of color again, right? We've got lots of color going on, doing a fun activity. Few words. All right, now it's writing better. That show their product. That show product is often, oh, let's see there, it didn't as much. Okay, now here's another one. Again, towards women. Nuevo Mundo is New World. I'm not sure even what they're advertising here. I don't know how that one is. But this is a big thing. One, it's showing a woman, again, in this fancy dress, which they didn't used to do. She's got makeup on and she's smoking. These are things that they would not have shown before. So you certainly see new portrayals of women. And in this case, you see smoking, makeup, the dress is more provocative or sexy looking in that sense. But there's almost nothing here unless it's for the cigarettes. I don't know. Again, not enough information on this one, that assuming they would have known the context. But that also shows you something key, that there's almost nothing here. It's color. Again, we have the same things. Color, few words. This is about, look, don't you want, like this, I want to be like her kind of thing. All right, here's another one towards women. This is definitely flapper inspired. All right, you've got the dresses, the new style, and again, this not having your arms. Oh, she does have a covering there, but here not having your full arms covered. Shorter dresses. They have the short hair, all traditional flapper style. For dancing the hours of the holiday. Again, fun. It's for women, to women. Showing them in ways that was not shown before. Not a lot of words. So we're seeing the same things here. Here's one for a car, Chevrolet, trying to compete with Ford. A sensational achievement in beauty and performance. Now this one has more words, right? But this is interesting too. If you notice, look, it's a female driver. It's a woman driver with talking to her friend. And they look like they're having fun. But that's a different one too. Again, all of these towards women and not showing a male driver talking to a woman. It's a woman driver talking to her friend driving. Bigger and better. You know, it's a little more wordy with the ones, but still a sensational achievement in beauty and performance. And the big picture still has the color and women and fun or happiness. Right, the key with this is that purchasing power equals happiness. Here's makeup, rouge, Mary Garden. That's just it. This is just a key of makeup, again, was not shown before, which shows you a cultural change in just what women are doing. Not a lot of words, color, shows a woman applying it. Here, stockings. It tells us it's Berkshire stockings. It's just a big picture. There's no other words. This is it. And instead, it's focused on the woman and the allure of her and you wanting that. This one, I'm assuming this product here, Calixtus, whatever, is this drink. They don't say much either, right? Yes, it is. There you go. Pay more attention. They're right there on the drink. So they got a whole bunch of bottles pointing, but this is the, I think the quintessential flapper going on. Drinking, which, you know, part of the 1920s was prohibition here. You know, the style of dress, the hair, having fun, very much that flapper. This was definitely targeted towards the flapper. But it still follows all of those same things. Fun, few words, color, women, and showing things that were not acceptable before for women, right? Here's another one. Oh, this is a great one for showing. You have the sports star. An advertisement. This is for cigarettes, Lucky Strike cigarettes. World's leading batter. I smoke Luckies because they are the best. It's toasted, no throat irritation. But I mean, this is definitely shows you this star power. This was brand new. Right? That this wasn't around before. Here's another one. Hosiery for the missus. Not much color. Kissproof. Here you go. That's too. So this is makeup. Right, that's the makeup. But this line, then they do more writing, okay? So not everyone followed the completely no writing, but there's a lot of color. Thing else. This advertising sexuality of kissing, of looking alluring, that's a huge thing. This never would have been seen in advertising just a few years before. So it's a huge shift and change in what's acceptable. And then how famous movie stars keep their hair beautiful. Again, that star power. So it shows you the different haircuts that you can get. And then girls would take this into the barber shop and say, you know, I want this one. Please cut my hair like that. And this was an interesting one too. If only I could tell this to every business girl. This is a big thing. Advertising feminine products. This was unspeakable not long ago. And in fact, you know, you have women pressing for birth control and other things like that that are getting jailed and trying to get women to know about their bodies, and you actually have this change. This is a great one. Get a kick out of life with Harley Davidson, right? So again, this is why you want a Harley Davidson. You know, look how fun they're having, enjoying leisure. That's another thing that on a lot of these show is leisure. Life is fun. You want a Harley Davidson because you want to enjoy life. All right, so let's go. We'll discard that. Let's go back to here. Okay, so those are the advertisements. And the key with that is just to show you how much it changed. Hopefully you see the connection to CPI in the process. We should put, right, fun activities. Life is fun. I'm going to add here leisure. And they do have the sports and movie stars. All right, so it's a huge chain. It's about consumption. The 1920s in so ways was about consumption. And this is epitomized in the flappers. So where are we at? Mass culture. Yep. So D. The flapper. I think this is the best example of it's gonna stay. There. Okay. I'm just make sure I didn't stop the recording. So the flapper is probably the best example of how this cultural consumption came about. You have the flapper largely were, again, targeted white, college educated, or getting a college educated, middle class women, young women. It could be older women too, but it really was, the target range was the at the low end, the 16 to we'll just say late teenage to late 20s. Right, so 16 to 28. And unmarried. Now there was, of course, there were some women who were older or who were married that still dressed as a flapper and acted like that. But this like portrayal on screen of a flapper was more this. She was sexualized. So that's key with this, is that these you had specific portrayed on movie screens, which then was copied by the people in general as sexualized, and if not just sexualized, sexually aggressive and open. You know, willing to kiss, talking about kissing, you know, potentially even more in the process, and it wasn't as taboo. You had bobbed hair. Here, we'll do the dress. The dress style was bobbed hair. The shorter dresses or skirts. Like to drink and smoke. Dancing was always a big thing. Having fun. That was what those were kind of the big things. They were defined by leisure and consumption. This is a big thing. It always, and what the portrayal was going out and having fun, going to parties, going to the beach, dancing, and in the process also spending. Right, so also besides, I guess, bobbed hair, shorts was usually some kind of jewelry and makeup as well. So leisure and consumption were a big thing. The other thing was challenging traditional gender roles. Right, so these are definitely, I think, two of the biggest things with it was leisure and consumption and challenging traditional gender roles. The fact that, you know, they smoked, that they were openly sexual, they participated and did activities traditionally that were male activities. Right? The short hair. In one of the YouTube video clips that's goofing off saying, you know, don't know who's a woman or a man or a woman, and it shows them turning back and forth, and it's like a guy wearing a wig and dressed in a dress, and then the girl with the short hair dressed in a tuxedo that looks like a man, and that was challenging those traditional roles, which they, you know, you didn't smoke in public as a woman before this. You certainly didn't drink and dance and go in public and talk about all these things. They were all direct challenges of what was traditional for women. Some of this comes about because you have at the same time women earning the right to vote. So where you see connections to this is they certainly are indebted that they owe some of this to the progressive era women, right? Because the progressive era women focus on college education, independence, and right to vote. And then you have from the 1920s, the wealth from post-war, World War I, and you add it to this, and you get, not probably what the progressive women thought, with the whole, quite so much of scandalous dressing and whatnot, but this new image and representation of women who had been limited in the past that now had more leisure. Of course, because it also connected to leisure and consumption, poor women were not participating in this. 9. So poor women, I will say those who were excluded, poor women, now they might get their hair cut or look at that, but they aren't getting to participate in the leisure and lacking leisure and money to follow it completely, right? So you certainly didn't have the freedom to follow that. It was really for the middle class group, of course. What's interesting is you largely don't see black women, but what was interesting is that the flapper tradition, in part, had come from African American cultural revival that had been taking place with jazz and other stuff before. What would say here? So what happened is that black women were largely excluded from the popular mass culture flapper. But there had been some flapper tradition that had been happening in Harlem and some other places prior to the flappers then taking over the white working class women. So they definitely borrowed from that, from jazz as well. Jazz culture. So I mean, it was this mix of activities and cultures that ended up kind of developing in colleges and campuses around there, and women finding that they wanted this independence, that they actually had the ability to live on their own for a while, that they were college educated, that they were wealthy enough to be able to do this. Or you find men that was part of it. Some women maybe couldn't afford all this leisure and consumption on their own, but found men who could take them on these dates. And part of it was going on dates. But 8, 9. I want to put it somewhere else than here. We'll put it right here. Dates was a big part. And again, that, I guess here we'll put it with consumption. That's where it makes sense. Leisure and consumption. It was about dating, which was a new term in the process too. And going, hopefully that's not something. Come on. All right, I'm still going on. It looks like, okay, good. And then they, go away now. Okay. There. Ugh. All right, sorry. Of course it goes to that while I'm doing that. So yeah, the dating was a whole new concept of that, which, we already looked at was in part because of the car and everything else. But was also because it was seen as more acceptable, and the wealth and the extra prosperity that was available for people to do this. Okay, so those are the new mass culture. There are some conservative aspects of it. So I think that's 1 on 3, which I want to look at. Conservative reactions. One of them, and this will we'll actually talk about women's right to vote, but is going to be prohibition. Okay, and one of the things is prohibition comes about because of women's right to vote. And this, so if we look real quick at women's right to vote and talking about why 1920s and the 19th Amendment. Okay, so what you have, one of the reasons that the 19th Amendment passes, there's actually a couple, was certainly women's World War I involvement. And feeling that they had a say in a part, and also that they felt that it was the time to be able to press for that change. Another thing is that actually connected it to the domestic sphere. They said that there are a lot of problems that you want us to fix, because our job with, remember, cult of domesticity was to protect the home. We can't do that if we don't have the right to vote. And so therefore, you should be giving us that we can do so. And they did also band together. They became a little more radical. They learned this from England. Okay, so with this, the idea was that I'm gonna put two over here. England, the women had actually thrown themselves in front of carts, locked themselves to fences and hunger strikes. They had vandalized and destroyed buildings in order to get the right to vote. Now, in the U.S., they don't go that extreme, but they take that and go, to be noticed, you have to force it. We weren't being polite isn't going to get us the change we want. They're just going to keep ignoring us. And so we have to step it up. And so there's a couple ways, there's a couple ways of being more radical that they learned. They did actually chain themselves, a group of women that had, were pushing for rights during and right after World War I. They chained themselves to the White House fence. No one killed themselves, but they did chain themselves to the White House fence. They it was much more of a demanding tone for protest for getting women's the right to vote. They also threatened the presidential election, not the president himself, but they said that women had the power to influence and control the male vote. So essentially was, if you don't give us the right to vote, we'll just tank everything by making sure our husbands vote the way we want. And we are going to band together. And what they also said was the idea of that there was going to be a female vote in that process. We're half the population, we can band together and do this. Of course, and many people thought that women would all vote the same way. And part of the reason for this was this domestic sphere, right? The female vote was connected to this. Many thought they would only vote on women's issues. And of course, and that all women were unified. It helped in getting the vote, but of course they find out once women have the right to vote that they're not all unified, that there's definitely different opinion and agreement on how they're going to do. And so it wasn't quite as revolutionary in the sense of thinking there was hope that maybe women could all band together and vote the same way and completely change how things worked. One of the ways that they did do this, though, was in prohibition and pushing for that, which actually came right before the vote. But women played a huge part as they were pushing for the vote, that they were pushing for prohibition. So again, women got the right to vote and had already started to use, when they were pushing for that, to get the 18th Amendment, which oops. So the key, right, prohibition comes about because of a woman's right to vote. But the key was, right, we see here, 19th Amendment, 18th Amendment. It came before women's right to vote, but because of it, women had been pushing and pushing for change. And this is one of those things that they needed. It took effect in 1920, where women continued to use this as a support for not only the right to vote, but that they needed a role in that process. So because women were pushing for the right to vote, there was an active push for prohibition in the process of this campaign. Now this had happened. This had been going on for a while. It was a long campaign that had taken place, in the late 1800s, with the view that drinking degraded working class family life and was the worst evils of urban politics. And women saw themselves as a huge push in this from the cult of domesticity, because it was seen as drinking as destroying people's lives. There was let's see if I can find it. There was this drawing that essentially was like, one drink is too many. Let's go back to here. Picture drunkard's progress. I don't know, it's called something like that. Let's see. Yeah, right there. I want a large picture. They don't show large pictures anymore. Okay, anyway, I'm going to get the whole stage. You can buy it. All right, with this, the key with Drunkard's Progress, and it's called the Drunkard's Progress here. Why is it red? I want to go back to blue. Okay. All right, the Drunkard's Progress, there's steps. This is step 1, a glass with a friend. Step 2, a glass to keep the cold out. Step 3, a glass too much. Step 4, drunk and wickedness. Step 5, you look, but they get harder to read here. Poverty and drunkenness is this one. And then beating up friends and crime, and then eventually killing yourself. So, right, you start off fun, and then you just work your way to death, right? Fun to death. And in the end, all that you leave is a sad wife and child, a family behind in the process. So this was really seen, what's important with this was seen as the evils of drinking. That this is the consequence. It destroyed families. Right, destroyed families. If you want to look up the picture, it is interesting. The Drunkard's Progress. All right, and that's a good view of kind of how they saw it. Destroys families, and through loss of money, home, security, even a father, right? All those things in the process. Of course, it doesn't work. Drinking was a huge part of 5. why it doesn't work. It was already, drinking was a huge part of American life. In fact, more people began drinking after Prohibition. They didn't have enough law enforcement. And in fact, it made every town had a speakeasy. Speakeasies, which provided illegal drink. Were everywhere. And it created more organized crime. Right, so all of this became problematic with Prohibition. They didn't have enough people. People weren't going to give it up. And then, of course, it became connected to flapper culture. People were going to continue drinking it. You created organized crime, like Al Capone was connected to this. So they made it into something that was actually far worse. And that is the problem often with when you go overboard in censorship or prohibition of things. Same thing actually happened with prostitution. And trying to eliminate some of the things of prostitution, it can actually make it worse. Same thing actually with abortion, and making abortion illegal increases the number of abortions as well as death. So the problem is, whether you agree with certain things or not, when you overregulate it and make it completely prohibited, especially if it was something that was allowed before, it can create serious problems. And in this case, like I said, they didn't have the enforcement to find the speakeasies, and people were very creative. They didn't have the ability to police and arrest, nor did the desire all of the time. It was already a huge part of culture. And they ended up creating, like I said, organized crime in the process, and it created more people drinking. Okay, the last thing we're going to look at is just the Ku Klux Klan. Because this did increase in the 1920s. Obviously, the Klan had already died out in many ways, and that had originally, right, part of Reconstruction. Okay, but in the 1920s, you had anti-immigration sentiment. That essentially helped open up new Klan, at least to start it and form it. The other thing you had that was a big deal was the Birth of a Nation, which was a film. It was a movie that was made in the 1920s, and so a movie. I'll do that. And it made the KKK out to be heroes. Right, so it recreated this kind of concept that the Klan was able to latch on to this movie and this anti-immigrant sentiment and model itself and revitalize itself. So they modeled, let's say, concepts under, there we go, secret handshakes, and rituals, anti-black, so basically black hostility and violence, although not quite to the same sense of that. It started off small, and then you had Hiram Evans. One of the big things with, well, real quick, with black hostility and violence is there was a lot of, it was more about intimidation than murder, right? They used fear and the, we'll say, past reputation to scare. So they didn't do like there was attacks and there was violence, and I don't want to undermine that at all. But the level of lynchings and killings that took place in during Reconstruction and the Jim Crow era, that's not what was going on to that level anymore. Instead, they used the burning crosses and scare tactics and destruction of property to try to get people to do what they wanted. The main individual that became the Grand Wizard was Hiram Evans, who was a dentist. He became the Imperial Wizard. And he ended up making it, he used the ideas of what had been with advertising in the 1920s to promote the Klan. And this is what helped rise it up and make it popular. They also advocated for, so what this would be considered as a modernization. But what they advocate for is 100% Americanism. Again, the anti-immigrant sentiment, and what they called faithful maintenance of white supremacy. They were super conservative. So again, conservative reaction. They supported prohibition. They were, they attacked birth control. Anti-Darwinism. Against women and women's independence. All of the other stuff, the censorship board for movies essentially was kind of an attack on modernity, and it was ironic that they used a lot of the modern stuff with advertising to become popular, but then were very conservative and pushed back against all of those things that were changing in the process. What they did is that they said here with conservative is that they presented themselves as defenders of traditional values. Like I said, they did resort to violence. They did have whippings and arson and lynching, but it was not to the level that it had been in the past. They had at their height several million individuals. So it's crazy because it went from nothing to a large group. The leader ends up actually going to jail, and this did help lose some of their leaders. And there was some of the other stuff they did, which was people went in and infiltrated and learned the secret rituals and handshakes, and are going to use this later as a mocking tool in the process. And that comes a little bit later with the civil rights movement. But they learned some of those here, and it does die down though with some of the jail and other stuff. But the Klan, the important part of what it was is it represented, one, that the racism was still extremely present, obviously, and supported in many ways. But more importantly, there was still this conservative movement to push back against change. So you start seeing more immigration, you start seeing women's rights, you start seeing all this change. You do have that there was with the Harlem Renaissance And while there was still not the same level of prosperity experienced by minorities, you do have opportunities for African Americans that had been increasing to a degree. And because of this, this is that pushback. Just like the censorship board and rating scale that developed because of the pushback to movie stars, just because of prohibition as a pushback to this fear of that drinking was destroying lives. And there was pushback in conservative movements too against the flapper. So you have, in one sense, the 1920s that shows all this change in new technology and modernity. And then at the same time, you do have a conservative movement that takes place that attempts to slow down and prevent some of that change. Okay, so that's the 1920s. We look at how the 1920s and prosperity shifts to the Great Depression and how life changes after that.